talking about how to get things done. If you've ever been in a situation where you've given somebody an assignment, someone who reports to you, and either they didn't get it done or they dragged their feet in getting it done, it took too long, or maybe even they undermined your initiative, then you were in managerial overdraft. Today, we're going to talk about how to avoid managerial overdraft. As managers, obviously, we have to leverage the people that work with us, people that report to us to get things done. We have to give assignments. And there's really three ways to give assignments, three capabilities that we have as managers to tell people to do things. The first one is we can use authority. Authority is I'm your boss. I'm your boss because I was assigned this authority by the CEO who got his authority from the board of directors, who got their authority through some, articles of incorporation. That's who I have the right to make certain decisions because of my position. So if I tell you do it because I'm your boss, I'm using my authority. Another capability that we have to get things done is to use power. Power is the ability to grant or withhold expected cooperation. If anybody needs something from you, if they expect your cooperation, be it information, be it a favor, you have power over them because you can tell them, I'm not going to do you this favor, which you're expecting, unless you do this for me. That's using power. So an example of using power would be to say, your bonus. Sure, I have authority over your bonus, but you're expecting your bonus. So that's really authority plus power. I'm not going to give you your bonus unless you do this. A more pure example of power would be, you know, a mother who drives her kid to work to school every day. If you aren't a good kid, I'm not going to drive you to school. I'll make you walk, or I'm not going to give you dessert. That's withholding expected cooperation. Now, there's another way we can get things done, which is called influence. We define influence as getting any way you try and get people to do something without using authority or power. But what does it look like? It looks like I'm trying to convince you that what I'm trying to get you to do is the right decision. It's the right thing to do. So those are the three ways we can get things done. Just to review, let's use the mother analogy. If I tell you eat your spinach because I'm your mother and I'm telling you to eat your spinach, well, now I'm using authority. If I tell you to eat your spinach because if you don't eat your spinach, there's no dessert and you're expecting dessert, well, now I'm using power to get you to do that. And if I tell you eat your spinach because if you eat it, you'll grow up strong and healthy and that's using influence. We have those three different mechanisms to get people to do things. Now that's clear. What's interesting is that how effective these three different capabilities that we have changes over time. So take a look at this graph here. On the vertical axis, we have how effective is it when we use these capabilities. So up at the top, when I say jump, you jump as high as you can. Here at the middle line, when I say jump, you don't do anything. It's got zero effectiveness. And down at the bottom, when I say jump, you do the exact opposite of jump. You actually undermine my decision. You actually get down and say, I'm not jumping. That's a negative. And then on the horizontal axis here, we have the number of times I'm asking you to jump. We have 0, 5, 10, 20. How many times do I ask you to do something using that capability? Now let's start with what do you think is the most effective? If I tell you to do something, which approach, power, authority, or influence will get you to jump the highest? Well, typically it's power. Now realize, so if I tell you to jump or else I'm not going to give you that favor, okay, I'm going to jump. Now realize that, let's say, use an example of taking your child to school. You're giving them a ride every day. Any parent knows that your child takes your cooperation for granted. They don't even realize you have power over them. The same thing in an organization. When you're doing favors for people over and over again, they think that's the way things are always going to happen. They even forget you're doing them a favor. So at 0, before you start using power, it's got zero effectiveness. But the moment you say, look, Unless you do this, I'm not going to do this for you. Okay, people, if they need your help, if they expect your cooperation, they're going to jump very high. As you can see, it's got high effectiveness. But what happens the second time I tell you to jump or else, or do this or else I'm not going to take you to school? I'm not going to give you a ride. Okay, you jump high again, you jump high again. But remember, power is the ability to grant or withhold expected cooperation. You didn't cooperate with me once. You threatened to withhold your cooperation once. You threatened again. You threatened again. How long before I find another ride to school? Somebody else to drive me to school? Somebody else to fulfill that expected need? How long before I stop expecting that cooperation from you? The moment that happens, you've lost all your power. And not only have you lost that capability to get things done, it actually goes in negative. That's why, if you use power over a dog, which means you hit the dog, sure, it'll sit, it'll behave once, twice, three times, but eventually it's going to bite you back. So in the short term, power is very effective in getting things done. But in the long run, it'll actually turn negative. Let's take a look at a different source capability. Let's take a look at authority. Again, this is I'm your mom or I'm your manager, I'm your boss. So I'm telling you to jump because I'm your boss. Well, people know that you're their boss. So it's at zero, it already has some effectiveness before you even use it. And then when you start exercising your authority, in the short run, it kind of builds because now people are reminded that you have the authority. Aha, they're my boss. And they'll do what you ask them to do, but how high will they jump? I'm jump because I'm your boss. How high will they jump? Will they jump as high as they jumped when I use power? No. They'll jump just high enough not to get fired. I jumped. What else do you want me to do, boss? It's not as effective as power, but it does work to some degree. And over time, what happens? I tell you to jump again. I tell you to do something again because I'm your boss. I'm your boss. Eventually, that kind of wears out also. And people over a longer period of time, as you can see, it'll actually also turn negative. People resent the fact that you're their boss and you're constantly using this authority. Let's take a look at the third capability, which is influence. I'm telling you to jump because if you don't jump, your feet are going to get wet. We're indoors, it's not raining. What are you talking about? Am I going to jump? No. But if I'm right and your feet do get wet, or whatever I warned you about is true, I told you you should do this because what's going to happen the next time I try and convince you? I'm starting to build your trust. The next time I tell you to jump, you might jump. And if I'm right again, you might jump higher the next time, and then higher the next time, and then higher the next time. Influence, if used correctly, will actually build over time. Now, eventually, in the long run, which is something to watch out for if you're somebody using too much influence, is once you won over someone's trust, they might start coming to you and asking you for information, for advice about something you know nothing about. Be careful because this is what happens to a lot of consultants and advisors. They're experts in one subject and they've won the trust in that subject. And suddenly people start asking them about different subjects. And if they don't say, sorry, that's beyond my expertise, they might start trying to speak intelligently about something they know nothing about. And that's when they start making mistakes. And that is when you see that the influence in the long run will also go down. So that's how authority, power, and influence change over time. So what's the message here? Well, obviously, the message is if you can, use influence to avoid managerial overdraft. But what happens when you're in crisis mode? You can't use influence. We don't have time for influence. We got to get things done. Well, when you're in crisis mode, you have to use your power and your authority. But what's the problem with that? Is that if you're in crisis mode too often, if you find yourself that you're always in a crisis situation, that's when you start finding yourself in managerial overdraft because all you can use is your power and your authority. And if you use that too much, it's going to turn negative and you have no more capability to get things done. So the key message here is avoid being in crisis, which sounds like common sense. But it actually isn't when you look at the field. In our experience, working with so many organizations, we see that many managers enjoy working by crisis. That's their management technique, their methodology. We wait for the crises and then we deal with all the crises. Crises come first. Wrong. How do you avoid management by crisis? What we do is we get the managerial team together, we create a learning environment, and just like a wet towel, we go look for all of the potential improvement points, problems throughout the entire organization. Because remember, a problem unaddressed is a crisis in waiting. We have to be proactive in looking for those problems, bringing them up before they become crises. And that's what you have to do. We have to create an environment where we can put all the problems on the table before they become crises. And what we really want to do is wring out the organization, get every last drop out so that we have them all there. And now we can start working on them before they come up to our attention as crises. That's something that we do in our program, but something you can also do as a manager on your own. Just create that learning environment, a safe space. It shouldn't be all the time. If you create a safe space and it's not defined in a room at a certain time, you could end up with anarchy. You don't want that. We want to create a time and a place where people can feel safe and put their problems on the table. And we want to do that often enough so we don't end up managing by crisis. If we do that correctly, then we can end up using influence instead of power and authority. What does that mean, using influence? The best way to use influence is, yeah, convince people. But maybe you don't know everything about the problem that you're trying to solve. A good way to use influence is get the people whose cooperation you need to solve the problem to help you create the solution. That's called collaborative participative management, participative decision making. When people who are going to implement the decision helped create the decision, now you're using influence correctly. We're convincing them. We're not just telling them what to do. They're helping us as managers learn what is the best solution because they know they don't have to study. Their hands are already dirty with the problem. So they have a lot of input they can give us to help us find better solutions. When you start including them in the decision-making process, we're influencing them with our knowledge as managers. They're influencing us. Obviously, as the manager, we have the final word. They can have their say, not necessarily their way. Then you're building up your influence. But that whole process of participative decision making takes time. And if you're managing by crisis, you won't have time for that. So that's the key message here is avoid management by crisis so you can use more influence and less power and authority. But if you find yourself in crisis, it can happen no matter how hard you go looking for problems, no matter how much work you do in being proactive, crisis will still come up. Then you need to use your power and authority. But it's good that you did the work to proactively identify problems so that when it comes time to use your power and authority, you have enough power and authority. You're not in a position of managerial overdraft where now you're in crisis mode and everybody says, you've overused your power, you've overused your authority, you've cried wolf too many times, and now you're managerial overdraft and you can't get anything done. So be careful of that. Again, try and use your influence more than your power and authority, unless you're in crisis mode. But save that power and authority for when you're in crisis mode, when it's a real crisis. And obviously, try to avoid crisis as much as possible.